Hello everybody and welcome to Adobe Live. My name is Flynn. I'm joined by the fantastic Bill Hope, and we would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we are creating and streaming from today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Bill, how are you going?
I'm doing very well. How are you, Flynn?
I'm really good, thank you. Really good. And we've got some new faces in our chat and also some good friends of ours. So Johanna is looking after us, our fantastic mod. So she'll be sharing some useful links and asking great questions and looking after us. So hi, Johanna. We got Festus, Kira Ora, Festus, Hema tuning in from Bangalore. That's awesome. And Jessica T. What's up, Jessica? Lovely to have you hanging out with us. And yes, I'll just piggyback off that comment, Jessica. I can't believe another Adobe Max is around the block again. I know. It's pretty wild. If you haven't seen, Adobe Max is the big creative conference, fully digital, fully free. Strongly recommend you check it out. There's so much stuff. We've been working on it all year. Been working on it since February, and it's happening in October. So definitely check it out. Jump in and register. If you're into illustration, which I assume you are, if you're hanging out with us today, there are tons of amazing illustrators that are putting together some great tutorials, day in the life kind of things, behind the scenes sort of stuff. There's something for everyone. So please check it out. Tell us what you think. But you can check out the Max website now and register and pick your sessions. It's all happening. But we are here today to cover watercolor with the fantastic Bill Hope. How much watercolor do you do?
Not as much as I'd like to, really. I mean, it was kind of before I got into digital art. It was sort of my first attempt at sort of working in color in any kind of way. I probably got my first set when I was, 10 or something. But it's kind of like my sort of sentimental. It feels like my going back to my roots is doing watercolor. Like I've always really loved it. I've never been someone who got into like acrylics or oils or anything like that. Watercolor's kind of been my favorite analog medium. Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, really keen to talk about it today. I think it's a interesting space in sort of the cross between sort of digital and analog watercolors, and it's an interesting time to do it as well because it's the illustration world feels like it's coming around to much more sort of like natural textures and things feeling sort of organic and on paper. That's sort of like there's a big push towards that in illustration right now. But at the same time, there's all these amazing digital tools that everyone's using, and the expectations to turn things around and speed and everything is still ongoing. And it's this time where sort of the technology is kind of caught up with some of the features of traditional drawing. And the lines are becoming very blurred. So I'm very interested in that sort of space in between digital and sort of analog watercolor stuff. So yeah, keen to go through it today.
Oh, that's very cool. And yet Steve in chat says some critters in a bathtub behind you there, Bill. That's one of your artworks, I think, that one behind you.
Yes, yeah, I'll bring that one up.
Let's do it.
So this is something I just finished over the weekend.
Wow.
I can see that on camera. So this is a watercolor piece on paper. So I've done the drawing there in
amazing
ink, and then colored it. Colored it in watercolors. And that's a kind of a style of watercolors which is quite tight. I'm sort of trying to do something that you're just trying to sort of render the shapes and colors, but up close you can see it's got that nice natural texture. But today I'd like to talk about a bit more sort of like rough watercolors and sort of watercolors that the focus is a little bit more on something like maybe something like this. This is a picture I did a while ago that's quite sort of splashy and rough, and you're sort of seeing a lot of the appeal of it is kind of the imperfections in the medium itself.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh wow, fun.
So,
all right.
So yeah, let's get started.
Let's do it.
I think it might be good to just show some samples of some watercolor pieces in Photoshop, and I'll just talk through some of the approaches that I've taken. Are you sharing my screen now,
Yep,
Flynn?
sharing your screen now, yeah, so we can see what you see.
Awesome. Okay. So I'll show you a couple of different images here. This is one that I did as a sample for a client. This one's all digital. This is another one using the same style. So this is
Wow.
There's all these amazing brushes that are coming out now that mimic a lot of the sort of beautiful imperfections of watercolor. So the way that the sort of pigment gathers in the edges of the brush strokes, and the way that it layers and blends into each other. There's a lot of the features of watercolor that you can replicate digitally. But at the same time, looking at a picture like this, it's still quite clean. You can't see sort of the texture of the paper coming through as much, or the scratchiness of a brush. So there's sort of quite a lot of pluses and minuses to doing digital watercolor, but I like sort of playing them off each other and sort of trying to get the best out of different features. So something like this is just a scan of some watercolor brushes, but there's some things like the sort of the mixing of the pigments here, or sort of the tailing off, even sort of the fibers that have got caught in the paper that you can see here. All those kind of things are just those like nice gritty little textures that I want to try and bring into my pictures a bit more. I've got a few birds, a couple of flowers. Yeah, this is a good example of a scan in where you can see all sort of the roughness of the paper and the pigments working together in really interesting ways. So we're going to try and replicate that today. I might just switch to another file, which was one that something I did earlier.
I love this little guy.
Yes, which is this little apple. And this is kind of the process that we're going to go through. So I started on this picture with a pencil drawing. So this is just a sketch that I've done on paper that I've scanned into Photoshop. Again, I love sort of the roughness of this. And what I've done with this picture is I've scanned in one section of watercolor that I did on paper. So this kind of blobby shape here, that's one that I've put into place, is a mark that I've made on paper. Then I've scanned it into Photoshop, and I've started working digitally with that scan. And then on top of that, I've started building up additional textures using some digital watercolor brushes. And I find this a really nice process because I feel like I'm getting the best of both worlds. I'm getting kind of that rough, natural feeling, and I'm getting the control and editability of digital work. Because the great thing about watercolor is how sort of spontaneous a medium it is, and how it's sort of you're working with water. You're sort of literally moving pigments in water, so everything's drying and blending together in different ways. It's a very sort of live, organic medium to work in. But at the same time, there's no real second chances in watercolor. Once you've made a mark, it's kind of there. There's no Command Z to help you out. So it's nice sort of being able to try and balance those things out. So that was the first one I did. So staying with the fruit theme, today I thought we would color in this banana character. And I might try and scan in some textures as well. And I'll sort of show you my process of doing that. So again, if anybody has any questions about illustration, watercolor, anything, just stick them in the chat, and I will try and talk through them as we go.
That's great. Yeah, I'll just mention that as well. So the chat we're using today is at behance.net/live or be.net/live. That's the one we're checking out. So if you're watching over on YouTube, jump over there. Let us know where you're from. Have you tried watercolor before, or are you like me and I can't remember the last time I've done watercolor. I think the next time I'll probably do watercolor will be with my daughter when she's old enough to start playing around with water and not ruining it. So I'm going to get some tips from Bill here for that. But yeah, it's been a long time, I think, since I've busted out the watercolors. So let us know in chat if it's a regular thing for you, or if it's been a while.
Yeah, it's an interesting medium because at the same time it's like an incredibly complicated medium in some ways. It's quite difficult to work with, but it's also like often it's people's first step into any kind of painting. It's like the simplest, it's like the easiest to pick up and work with. So I'm sure it's fine if you're sharing my screen now, but I'm going to sort of try and do a little bit of work in camera here. So what I want to do is basically just make a texture, and I'm not doing a drawing on paper now. I'm just sort of making a shape that's going to be interesting to bring into Photoshop and work with. And all I'm trying to do here is sort of manufacture a little bit of that organic feeling. So I've got my very trusty, as you can see, well-used watercolor palette here, which I've had for many, many years. I'm going to get a little bit of water, and I'm just going to start mixing. So I've just taken a bit of water onto my brush, and I'm sort of mixing it into the black watercolor thing there. So I'm just kind of filling in that one color. And all I'm going to do is get my piece of watercolor paper and
wow, this is ambitious.
This is happening. So all I want to do is kind of just make one interesting mark. I'm going to let the brush dry out a little bit so I get those textured edges. I'm looking for imperfections, so the fact that a little bit of pigment is gathered at the top there is good. And I'm sort of, sorry, get myself in camera. I'm just getting a rough banana shape. So that looks pretty good to me. That's just sort of like a rough swipe. That's all it is. I'm not going to add any more detail to that whatsoever. And now, sorry, this is a little bit risky trying to do this.
This is great.
But let's give it a go. So I'm literally just taking my shape, and I'm going to take a photo on my phone. That's it. Now I'm going to get my photo, and if you could go back to Photoshop, Flynn.
Going to Photoshop.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just airdropping that picture. Now the brush stroke that I just took. Okay, here it is. Can you see that big brush stroke?
Nice. Yeah, we see it.
Yeah.
This looks like one of my bananas that's been sitting in the bowl for a little bit too long that we end up putting in the freezer to make banana bread that never happens.
Awesome. So now I'm just going to work with this texture, and I'm going to kind of clean it up so it's something that I can use within this image. So there's a few things that I'll go through. If you really want to follow this process, maybe it's better to go back when it's on YouTube and watch it back, but I'll just kind of barrel through this now. So I'm going to edit the levels. I'm just putting adjustment layers on top of this layer that I've got in Photoshop. I'm going to change my curves a little bit, and what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to just make as much separation between the whites and the blacks in this, so I can just get a clear black stroke on a pure white background. That's kind of my aim. So I'll do that. I'll use my magic wand to select some areas of color that I want to get rid of. I want all those to be a kind of pure white, so I'm going to up the brightness on that. That's starting to look nice and clean, so I'm going to flatten all of that into one layer. Might get rid of any pigment. I'm just going to drop it off so it's completely black and white. I'm going to select that stroke, and I'm going to put it onto a new layer. Okay, so that's looking pretty nice and clean. But what I want now is I want to, right now, if I get rid of the background, you can see that I've got white pixels and I've got black pixels. But I just want the transparency of the black pixels. I don't want the white in the background, because I want to be able to layer this texture over itself. So what I need to do is I need to get rid of all the white pixels, and there's a slightly complex way that I'm going to do that. But once you've got it, it's very easy. So I'm going to select that texture that I've got. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to make a mask for that layer. And I'm going to go to my channels panel. And in the bottom channel, I'm going to, copying my texture. And then I am pasting it into the mask. Now what I've got is I've got a mask of that texture. Sorry, this will all get much more straightforward and simple in a second.
That was very cool. That was like a really interesting way to like select just the color. I might have done it by using like color selection or something, but I often find that doesn't really get a great result. You often like have to.
I'm sure there's a better way of doing this. This is
I think it's a much worse way of doing it, because I can see what you've selected here, and it looks far superior than how I would have guessed to do it.
Cool. So now I've got a nice clean selection of that brush stroke, and it's in a color, and it's transparent as well. So if I duplicated it and moved it around, it layers nicely on top of itself. You can see those colors that would blend nicely. So now I've got a really nice texture that I can use in my image. So let's bring our banana friend back.
As we do that, I might just jump, just check in with chat, because we've got a couple of questions and comments and stuff.
Cool.
So where are we? Photoshop versus Fresco, because we're talking about watercolor, and of course you can use watercolor in Fresco, but would you use Photoshop or would you use them for different things? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, sort of the watercolor brushes, the live watercolor brushes in Fresco are just incredible. They still totally blow my mind. It's been out for a year, but it's just the coolest thing and so fun to play around with. So I'm a big fan of doing the watercolor stuff in Fresco. I think right now I'm just I want to work with a lot of layers and doing a lot of adjustments. So having the full suite of Photoshop right now works a little bit better for me. But Fresco is awesome for this kind of thing.
Very, very cool. Elizabeth, great to see you, Elizabeth, in chat. Bill, you are a person of many talents. Every time I see you on stream, it's something new. Absolutely. Totally agree.
Thanks.
And AG47 has asked, are you just using a mouse? No need to have a Wacom to get the texture or detail?
Right now, I'm just using a mouse just because I'm editing this texture, but I'm going to go into doing some painting with digital watercolor brushes in a second, and for that, I'd much prefer to use a Wacom tablet or whatever sort of sensitive tablet you want to use.
So everything you've seen so far, you could just use a mouse because you're scanning it in to bring in that kind of texture and everything like that. That's great.
Yeah, definitely. So what I've done is I've sort of warped that shape to sort of fit our banana guy a little bit more. And obviously he's not a red banana, so we're going to fix that. I'm just going to go into my hue saturation adjustment, and let's make him into a nice yellow banana.
So you don't really have to worry too much about the color that you're using the watercolor for. Really, you're just after that texture. Is that right?
Yeah. And especially like I'm doing it like I did the first stroke in black because that's just going to show up best. Like I don't and that's the nice thing about it. You're kind of, it's almost like you're making a stamp or something to work with. You don't really care about the brush itself. So now that I've kind of done the textured part of it, I've got my drawing, I've got my base texture, and now we'll start working with some watercolor brushes. And Adobe has made this very easy for you in that there's been people trying to make versions of watercolor brushes for a long time, but a friend of the show, Kyle T. Webster, has come through and made an amazing pack of watercolor brushes. And I'll show you now, if you're not familiar with this, how to get these. You go to your brushes pane in Photoshop, you click the little drop-down menu, and you just click Get More Brushes. It takes you to the Adobe website, and there are thousands and thousands of amazing brushes, and there is a pack just for watercolors. My sort of pro tip for this is that if you scroll down, I've got the watercolor set here, and there are, I don't know how many there are, but there's like 150. There are so many, so you have sort of all the watercolor brushes you could want, and I kind of just get a little bit, it's too much. So what I've done is I've chosen I think 15 or so of these that I like, and I've renamed them myself to sort of what have I called them? Yeah, so I've given them names like Fine Liner, Background Blender. I've kind of given them my own name so I sort of know what I'm working with a little bit more. And that's cool. That's sort of just made the whole process a little bit more comprehensible to me.
That's great. So like if you're playing around with those brushes, like, obviously experiment and play around with them as much as you want. But as you start finding use for them in your artwork and trial and error and everything, you can kind of more or less favorite them and just say, yeah, this is a really good background texture. This is really good for the fine line. That's a really cool tip.
Yeah, no, it makes the whole thing a lot easier. And it's great just getting them out and playing around with them. So this is a lovely blotchy one that kind of mimics, I guess, wet on wet. So when you're sort of painting with a wet brush onto paper that's already wet, it sort of replicates a little bit of that feeling. Let's try another one. I've got this one called a smearer, which gives me sort of the nice texture of the paper coming through. And so many of these are just lovely to use and to play around with. There's a nice big angled brush one. And so many of these, you get this subtle dimpling coming through, which is very sort of reminiscent of watercolor paper, where you're sort of getting, that's the pigment kind of gathering in the little dents in the paper itself. It mimics the way that the pigment sort of gathers on the edges of the brushes. I'm a big fan of this stuff. It's really cool.
It's very cool seeing how excited you are about it, how much you're into it, like talking about it. It's great.
Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one, I might use the angled brush actually. And because this shape just doesn't quite fit my banana figure here, I'm just going to start filling out some of the color just to fully flesh it out. So just start painting. Oh, actually, one thing I've come across here is that because it's mimicking watercolors over each other, all of them blend onto each other. So you can't put down a completely opaque color. It's almost like all of them are transparent to mimic the blending. But right now I just want to fill in that section. So I'm gonna go ahead and just grab a totally standard brush where I can paint.
And that's something that's kind of like coded into the watercolor pack, like that it behaves differently because that's what it's for.
Yeah. I'm sure you could go into settings and edit that and make them opaque, but I kind of want to leave it to have something that feels a little bit more sort of true to the form.
Cool.
I don't need that bit, so I'm just going to knock that bit of color back there. So one thing about this texture that I've got here is that it's got a nice sort of the texture of it's nice, but it's just one color. It's one flat color, and I want to introduce a little bit more variety into it. So I'm going to make a new layer and make something called a clipping mask, where I sort of clip the layer above my texture to the one below, and that just means I'm sort of painting within the bounds of the layer below. So if I go back to my watercolor brushes, sorry guys, I've got a lot of brushes. I'm going to find one, the irregular edge, which has got a nice texture to it. And I'm just going to paint a little bit of a varied yellow into my existing texture. And you see, as I paint, it fills in just in the texture that I've already got there. And that's already starting to feel a lot more natural there. And I'm going to lighten up front of our banana man here. There's a great phrase that I remember hearing from a Pixar animator that talked about like when you're working with like really clean digital tools, you don't get anything for what he called, you don't get anything for free. And by that he meant like there's no, if you're filming with your camera in your backyard, you're going to have birds tweeting in the background and there might be a grainy texture on the film, and there's all these things that make the image interesting. But when you're working with really clean digital tools, you have to kind of, anything that's there, you have to put there. You have to add all that detail in. And one of the nice things about watercolor is that the textures and the look of it are really inherently appealing. So it's kind of like you get a lot of character for free, in a sense. So you can really quickly get something that feels like a nice sort of finished image.
Nice.
So now I'm just going to get a one that's called the fine liner brush, and I'm going to go through and start sort of filling in a bit of detail. So I've just done the eyes there. On a new layer, I'm going to color in his hat here. But another thing I'm going to do is I'm trying to sort of replicate that nice kind of imperfection in this medium. So I'm not going to paint within the lines. I'm just going to sort of like roughly work over the space that I want the hat to go in. And I'm going to try and accentuate the nice imperfections of that. And then once that's there, I might go in and start erasing it. So I've got a slightly, I'm not sort of keeping too closely within the bounds. I'm getting that nice texture in with my drawing there. That's a brush that it's got a lovely kind of blotchy feel to it. So I'm just going to mask that off. Now I've got my nice textured green hat.
It's very cool.
He should just be yellow at the top there, though. It looks a bit weird having a green top. Oh, I'll fix that. Yeah. Sorry, Flynn. Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask. Is the banana drawing, is that digital or was that on paper too?
That one's actually on digital. The apple I did on paper, but this one, I think with another Kyle T. Webster, one that does a really good job of mimicking a lead pencil. I've sketched that up.
That's really cool. So I know Hema from question just over on YouTube. So you first draw on paper and then use watercolor on a separate paper and then try to merge them. Yeah, I guess essentially, yeah. So I mean, Bill's kind of shared two different versions of that. One where the banana drawing here has been done digitally, but then he jumped into and showed us at the beginning of the stream today, just a really super quick, took like 10 seconds or something of actual watercolor, and then took a photo on his phone and then brought it in. So if you missed that, yeah, definitely check out the replay. But yeah, could also do drawing and scan that in and separate it, and then do the watercolor on a different piece of paper and then bring that in. Lots of different kind of approaches.
Yeah, I really like just sort of getting to a point where, the medium matters less. You're just kind of creating the thing that you want to make, and I really like the blend of digital and sort of analog drawing. Now, I'm doing some things here that obviously that you can't do in watercolor. I'm painting white on top of a color, which is never going to work out in watercolor painting. But that's one of the fun things, just having that kind of flexibility there, and the level of control that I've got is obviously more than be able to get on paper quite as much. So we've got a nice, that's looking good. I want a shadow on this guy here. And again, I'm going to try and do something to replicate something that feels a bit more natural. So I'm going to get a sort of bluey gray color. And let's drop down to a lower layer. That's still feeling a bit clean. I think I want something a bit rougher. And the blotch is a bit soft. Texture painter might be good. Yeah, and I'm just going to let my brush bleed off a little bit, and it brings out that kind of paper texture underneath. And again, with this one, like one of the nice things about watercolor is that kind of like blotchiness that you get in the pigment and the ability to mix pigments. So to kind of replicate that, I'm going to press Command and select my layer. So I've got all those pixels selected. And I'm just going to paint a little bit of color inside that. So I'm just going to add like a little tinge more blue into that. And that's starting to feel a little bit more natural, that shadow underneath. A sort of cheat that I often do is just to scan in some watercolor paper and drop that into the background. So cool. That's already feeling a little bit more. And there are some people who have the ability to sort of like really replicate watercolors digitally where you just wouldn't know. But I'm not that fussed. I kind of like something that is kind of in between. Is sort of a mix of the two. Again, I'm going to do the same thing I did before there. I'm just going to select the pixels, and I'm going to sort of add a bit of color, painting with the blotchy brush into the top of my banana guy there. And I might go ahead and actually on a new layer, I might pick up what we were using before. I think it was the natural texture flat. Yeah, that feels good. And I'm going to just paint a little bit of shade into that banana guy there.
And so when you're picking the shade, it's just kind of like a slightly darker version usually of whatever the color is to add to the shade? Is that how you just kind of pick it?
Yeah, I mean, it depends kind of what the lighting of the scene is, but often when something's curving, like there's the curvature of the banana here. As it curves away from the light, you kind of get an intensity in saturation as well. So if we look at our color picker, the colors that I've chosen there are closer to sort of the white end of the spectrum. And as they get darker, they move over to the right where it's a more intense saturated color. So there's a little bit of sort of method to the madness in what colors I'm picking. But yeah, it's in a sense just a darker version of the color I was using before. So we're pretty much done with that guy. I might just do a little bit of shading on his eyes here. One of the kind of dangers with digital though is that you end up inevitably, because you have the ability to, you kind of overwork these things a little bit. And with a lot of watercolors, it's kind of a lot of the skill is just kind of knowing when to stop. To not overwork something and kind of just let the medium speak for itself. Cool. Okay, so really happy with that. And I might move on now to just working a little bit of background in. Okay.
So do you have like with the textured background, do you have like a hard drive, you know, is your hard drive just full of like hundreds of these things, or is it kind of case by case and you just kind of scan something and use it for a single project and, you know, do it new every time?
It's a bit of both. I mean, on my computer, I do have a folder that's just called resources and textures, where I just sort of put things like watercolor paper or brick textures or things like that I've sort of built up over the years. And I mean, I think for someone starting out in illustration as well, something I wish I'd paid a little bit more attention to is that you want to be able to use textures and references that you've got in commercial work and in work that you'll be sort of sharing around with people. And I earlier in my career was kind of just like pulling things from the internet without really checking where they were coming from. I would just sort of, oh, that's a brick texture, I'll use that. I'll grab that brush, I'll grab those stamps or anything like that, just because you want to use them, which is totally fine. But down the track, eventually you want to use those things, and it's good to have a folder where these are sort of my copyright approved, I've paid for them, they're ready to go textures that I can use later down the track. And it's a good thing just to keep in mind, because I've got in my brushes panel, I've got all these brushes where I have no idea where they came from. And I can't use them because I don't know if I'll be sort of stealing someone's work if I were to use them in my commercial work. So it's good to kind of keep that in mind a little bit.
I had the exact same issue with fonts. When, you know, fonts are a lot easier now, like with Adobe fonts, you've got like an unbelievable amount of fonts you can play around with. But yeah, I'll add the caveat of at the beginning of my career to my comment as well. It was very common in design studios that whatever the design studio font library was, I think any designer that worked for that company would leave with those fonts on a USB or hard drive at some point. And I had the same problem. I had bought a couple of fonts, or we'd use fonts on a particular project, but I wasn't aware of, in fact, I was pretty confident that I wasn't allowed to use it without paying for it again. But yeah, end up with this huge library of all these fonts that just couldn't use for any commercial project or really any like portfolio pieces at that point, because it was getting a little bit close to, using someone's work for free. I ended up deleting them all because it was just a mixed bag, and couldn't even really use them in a logo, right? Because this could be someone's hard work that I've just kind of got on a USB in 2003 and moved around from computer to computer.
Yeah, and it's one of those good things to sort of keep an eye on, because you sort of end up relying on those tools a little bit. There's brushes that are kind of just like my go-to, if if I can't use those on a commercial project, I might feel really, really stuck after a while. So yeah, it's good to keep that in mind. So I'm just doing a little bit of background work here, and this is a bit more in the realms of trying to sort of mimic actual watercolors. So it's a tough thing, because as good as these brushes are, there's just this sort of inherent chaos to natural tools that you're not going to be able to fully replicate. I mean, maybe at some point we'll have completely sort of, I don't know, I think people have tried to do this before, where you're trying to like create complete virtual brushes where every bristle is reproduced. And there are things that are pretty close, but it's not quite there. Some of the lovely brushes you've got are things like, he's got one that's called Salt, I think. Yeah. And when you're working on real watercolor paper, a technique that a lot of people use is using crystallized salt, and they scatter that on their drawings.
Oh,
and
wow.
the salt absorbs a small amount of water. So if you've got a section of color like this, you can sprinkle salt on top, and it just picks up a couple little bits of color, and it just makes a really nice little texture.
Oh wow, I've never heard that technique before. That's crazy.
Yeah. It's fun. So I might just paint a little bit of kind of grass down in the background here.
Nice. We've even got some suggestions from chat as well.
Oh
if you
yeah,
wanted them.
suggestions for additions.
Additions as you're doing the trees. Rosella in the sky, or a magpie preparing to swoop. It is magpie season is coming.
It is coming, and I went outside to let the dog have a run around this morning, and one of our friendly neighborhood magpies was giving us a kind of intense look. So
The side eye, yeah.
I'm put on notice.
There's a park that we go to at the moment, and it's just like there's this like a really long path, and it's super long, but not super wide. But there's magpies all over it. And yesterday we were kind of going through with my kid, and there were magpies literally on each side, like just staring us down, not intimidated by us at all. We're just thinking, wow, in a month or so when they start swooping, I don't think we can go down this path, because they're going to get very territorial.
All right. Well, maybe I'll give that a go. Sorry, I'm going to try and do this without any bird reference. So I apologize if this is not going to be the world's best magpie. But let's try and draw a magpie.
Amazing. Steve's saying, cheeky birds, we have magpies in New Zealand as well. I didn't actually know that. I didn't know that there were magpies in New Zealand. I thought it was an Australian thing. There you go.
There you go.
Amanda's saying, they don't swoop if you feed them. I don't know about that. Do they remember? Have you ever been attacked by a magpie, Bill?
Yeah, I've definitely been swooped. I've never sort of been injured by a magpie before, but I've been sort of definitely freaked out by one in the past. But I've made an effort, I think, to foster friendly relations with the ones that live in our backyard. So I think we're good. The puppy that we've got now, though, might be a bit of a spanner in the diplomatic works. Hopefully they can accept him for who he is. Okay, so now that I've got a loose sketch of a magpie there, I might get the brush that I was using, that I drew the banana with, which is, I don't actually know what the name of it is, but it's a fancy Photoshop brush that, if you can kind of see, I know it's very small on the screen, but actually I'll make it a much bigger brush so you can see what's going on. If you can see on the screen, it's detecting the angle of my stylus.
Right.
And it's this fancy brush, so I can use just the tip of the brush, and I get a nice fine line, or I can use the side and I get a big sort of textured swoop.
Oh, wow.
So it's quite a fancy brush. I don't know what the technical name of them is, but it's great for doing this kind of thing.
Are you holding anything particular down to show that angle of the brush, or is that just built into the brush?
That's built into the brush. I think I think they're just called live brushes. I think that's the name for them. And they come with lots and lots of sort of editable features where you can adjust the angle and the wetness of them and the load of them and all this kind of stuff that I admittedly don't really understand. But this one has come nicely pre-worked out. So yeah, so with something like this, I can draw just with the tip of the pencil. And then if I was doing a line down the side of the face, I get that nice texture. And it does quite a good job of replicating real pencil.
That's really cool. I've not seen a brush like that before, because I often have that if I'm like drawing on the iPad as well. Like sometimes I'll be experimenting with the brush, just playing around, and then I'll get like, you know, this big, you know, exactly what you did, to get this big kind of flat color. I'm not familiar with the brush, so I'm like, oh wow, like I didn't realize that it would do that. So, but that's interesting that it shows the angle. Turns out magpies are everywhere. See, I learned things on Adobe Live. Gareth lets us know magpies are in Scotland as well.
Yeah,
and they're also in Canada, thanks to Steve. My gosh, they're everywhere.
All right, so I'm sort of going a bit rougher now and getting some of the looser brush strokes of this down. This one's going to be tricky because it's going to be all black, so I'll need to try and show that in the watercolors. So let's move him over to the side.
This poor banana is going to get swooped.
Yeah, and I mean, just to show on the screen, I'm having to make this quite a big magpie, so yeah, I'd look out. All right, so I'm just going to get a layer underneath my sketch that I've done, and let's start trying to do some of the watercolor work there. So let me go back to my chosen watercolor palette. I might just sort of loosely start building this up and kind of decide where I want the darker textures to be. So I'm letting the brush do most of the work of sort of filling in the textures here, and then I'm going to go back in and clean it up, and I can get some of the white lines. Do you know off the top of your head, Flynn, where the white bits on a magpie are?
No, I don't, but I can look it up.
It's probably a little bit on the wing, I think. I just can't remember if there's anything on there, if they have white patches on the head or not.
It's like on the back.
Yeah, okay. Let's add a little bit there. And maybe a little neck bit. It's looking all right.
Yeah, it looks like you've got it.
All right, I'll look up those. And then black beak as well. Cool. Okay. If anybody has any other suggestions, feel free to drop them in. It's a little bit slower than my usual, just sort of knocking things out in ink, but I'll see what I can do.
That's really cool.
And the pencil brush and the ink brush I'm about to use, I think, are also Carl T. Webster brushes, but I think they come in it's called like, I think they just come in what's called the mega pack, which is kind of the holy grail of you just get everything.
Yeah. Well, we've only got 10 minutes left, so I might just throw in the other one. Rosella was one of the other ones. Do you remember? Do you know how to draw a Rosella off the top of your head? That was tough.
Not really.
I could try to get a photo of one outside. It might be harder. Or if anyone has another suggestion, we've got a very short amount of time, but you can throw it in.
Okay. I just move that tree out of the way. This is one of the joys of working digitally. I can just push these things around a bit.
I mean, you could put a koala in the tree as well, if that's easy to draw from memory.
Okay, and with something like this, I've drawn this line, but you can see how that just stands out as kind of, it feels too clean, that line.
Right.
So I want to kind of texture that. So what I might do is, like I did with the texture I brought in from the photo, I'm just going to sort of take the selection of that and then paint back into it with one of our nice loose watercolor brushes. And I'll just give it a little bit more looseness.
Yeah, nice.
Maybe I'll wing it. I'll give it a go with the Rosella.
So like I throw you curveballs a lot.
That's all good.
Very brave.
I mean, they kind of got like a parody kind of face. I'll have it come down like this. Some little legs going on. I think they've got a little beak.
Yeah, little beak.
Big old eye. You can be a cute Rosella. Actually, this will be a good opportunity to play with a bit of color. I'll show you some of the cool blending stuff that you can do with this as well. So, if you are much more talented than me, you do this without line work. But I'm a bit of a line work guy, so I'm going to stick with that. All right, so I'll get one of my sort of nice loosey-goosey brushes, and I apologize that these will be incorrect Rosella colors, but we'll just make it colorful. So I'll paint some loose colors there, and then we'll get a nice bit of really intense green over here, and we'll get some nice blues that we'll put underneath. And I think this will work. There's a lot of sort of nice smudging tools. And you can see here, I'm just kind of pushing the pigments together a little bit and blending some of those. And this is almost the equivalent of like adding more water on paper.
Right.
And pushing some of those pigments around. And then again, I want to add a bit more variety to that color. So I'm just going to select my texture and paint within it again. I'll get a nice dark red there.
I think you're pretty accurate with the colors, with the red and the green on the back and the blue. Yeah.
Awesome. And then I'm going to get a kind of textured brush to erase some bits of that, just to give a little bit of the feeling that it was painted on. We'll work a eyeball in there. One thing to keep in mind when you're doing these digital watercolors is instead of adding white, like I could have painted white into that eyeball, but it's better to erase the color, to take away, to expose the paper beneath. Because when you're doing something like, it's going to be tiny on screen, but with something like the water texture that I've got in the paper here, if you want a pure white in a watercolor, you just have to leave that paper untouched.
Right.
So I have to think at the start, when I start painting, that little point of light in the water has to stay white. So I need to make sure I don't touch that section of the paper. So that's one of the kind of complexities that you need to keep in mind with watercolor. But with digital, obviously, you can just erase it as you go along.
It takes a lot of precision. What happens if you go over it? Like you got to tear it up and start again, or is it?
Too bad, give up. Yeah.
That would take patience I don't have, Bill.
One thing you can do, actually, if you're playing around with watercolors, there's a fantastic product called masking fluid, which is it's like a liquid plastic. It's liquid latex, and you can paint with this liquid latex onto your paper, and it dries, and then you paint it or do while you're painting over the top, and then at the end you sort of with your finger you peel up the latex and you can pull it away and it leaves white paper underneath, and it's really fun to play with, and it's very satisfying to it's like have you ever seen videos of people where they've got masking tape and they've done like a painting and then they're pulling the masking tape off at the end? Yeah, very similar vibes.
A bit like that feel. Yeah. There's a whole subreddit for that. People just like peeling things off. You know, when you get like peeling the paint off and it leaving that perfect line.
Yeah. That's very much like that. Okay, I think we're getting towards the end here, so I'll just finish up a couple of sections on our Rosella. And that's our scene kind of coming together. So hopefully I was able to share some sort of fun techniques with this kind of stuff. I love playing around with it. It's really cool, and it's really accessible, all these tools now. This stuff used to be hard to get your hands on, but it's very easy now. So it's good stuff.
Oh, it's super cool. Oh, it's been great hanging out with you. It always is. I love doing the streams with you. I get to just sit back and ask silly questions and have a lot of fun just reveling in how talented you are.
Thanks, Blaine.
I hope everybody in chat had a great time. Thanks for participating and everything. Some great questions in there. I will mention as well, because we're talking about Fresco quite a bit, there was just a big update to Fresco if you want to check it out. With adjustment layers and alignment guides and grids and all sorts of stuff like that. Fresco is really fun to watch them build because they're building it from scratch, specifically based on what people want.
I don't think I've seen the new update. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, check it out. There's a whole bunch of new things in there, so you can play around with that if that's your jam. And we will be back on Thursday, and a bit different to a lot of the streams that we'll do, where we kind of do part 1 and part 2. We're actually going to be tackling something different. I'll let Bill chat about it, actually. So we're going to be doing life drawing.
Yes, so we're going to be doing life drawing on Thursday, which is really exciting. I mean, it's something I've been doing for forever, and it's kind of like my I don't know, it's like my go-to advice for anyone getting to illustrations to do life drawing. So I'm very excited to do it on the stream. It's a huge subject matter, so we'll just sort of be chipping away at the first bits of it. But basically, it's the practice of drawing the unclothed human figure, usually you would do it in a studio in real life, but obviously we'll be doing the online version of it. It's a fascinating subject, and it's something that has sort of become a bit more accessible in the online space as well. So again, it's a good time to be doing it. So hopefully you can join us on Thursday for some life drawing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think life drawing with you, Bill, and with other illustrators that we've had on, often people saying, how do I get started? How do I get better? How do I improve? And time again, it's do some life drawing classes, check it out. You know, it's very good at helping you regardless of what your style is. So I'm super keen.
And this stream will be very lockdown friendly as well. So even if you're stuck at home, we'll have some good stuff for you how to get started.
That's awesome. Well, I hope everyone can join us. Don't forget to register for Adobe Max coming in October. Going to be lots of fun, lots of illustrations, illustrators, and fun stuff happening then. We'll see you in a couple of days with part 2 with Bill Hope. Bill, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks so much, guys. Have a lovely day.
See everyone.
Bye.